keep an eye on that volt gauge there. Yep, ain't supposed to be doing that. Hello my friends, and welcome to Tom's Tinkering and Adventures. I'm supposed to be heading out on a adventure in this new adventure rig that I got here, this free Chevy pickup that my friend and fellow YouTube guy, Robert Roy, handed off to me, which I am delivering to my daughter in North Dakota. So there you go, now you know what's happening with this thing if I haven't already given enough clues. I'm helping my son move to Utah and then going on to North Dakota. I even got the old atlas in here so we can figure out a good route. It's going to be all highway. I haven't done everything that I should do to this truck before I take off because I could end up spending a month and several $1,000s, but I am going to try to make it reliable. Excuse me here, I'm going to pop the hood open. Well, semi-reliable, let's say. So, we worked on some, there we go, we're under the hood. We worked on some basic tune-up stuff, oil change, air filter, spark plugs, wires. The cooling system was giving us a little bit of trouble, so we changed out the water pump and the thermostat. But now we're having this charge issue, and it's probably just the alternator, but I am going to go through this and show y'all how to do basic troubleshooting on an alternator and see if we can figure it out before we order one of these. They're about $100. Now, like I said, I don't want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on this free truck because the idea was to get my son-in-law and my daughter a truck for cheap, and if I end up spending $2,500 on this truck, well, they could have just bought one locally. I mean, all said and done, they probably could have anyway, but it's part of the fun. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to double check all of our connections are good over here, our positive and negative connections, which we installed this battery a while back, and they seem to be okay. And then I also want to check stuff like this. I might pull that ground connection off and clean it. Doubtful that that's the problem, but you just never know. And the next thing you want to do is follow your connections that you have. So this one here runs up and over, so we're going to track wherever that ends up, which looks like it goes up underneath here somewhere. So you want to check all your connections for corrosion, make sure that they're tight, that sort of stuff. There should also be a ground somewhere onto the block. Yeah, this one right here. So we're going to want to check that one, make sure that one's good. Wiggle all these. And then after that, I'm going to grab a multimeter and we're going to make sure that our gauge is reading properly. So on this truck, this alternator is pretty simple. It's what's called a one-wire alternator, even though it has more than one wire. So you want to check this connection. I've peeled this rubber boot off of here. This is the connection where we will be testing this with the multimeter later. And then you also have this single plug here. And everything looks pretty good in there. It even has dielectric grease. So I'm going to plug that back in. I followed this wire. Remember we were looking at that? It goes up and around here and into this fuse relay center. Right in the back there. Even though it's a little bit dirty. I mean, this is a 1995. It looks pretty okay to me. You could spend time to clean all that stuff, but just from the way it's acting, the fact that it's putting out solid voltage at idle, and then when you rev it up, it drops. That would tell me that it's likely the alternator, but you want to check all these things. Check your belt tension as well. Nice thing about this truck is this alternator is really easy to work on, maybe even easier than, say, like an older car. So if we end up pulling it out, which I have a feeling we will, it's pretty simple to do. So I'm gonna get in, start it up, and then we will run up the multimeter here. We'll set it on, let's see, we're on alternating current right now. So we'll set it over here to direct current to 40 volts. That's your direct current. That's your alternating current. Now, this is an okay multimeter, but a lot of new ones are auto ranging, so you don't even have to set it in the range here. But if you don't have an auto ranging and you're not sure what the voltage is, always start at the highest and then work your way down. On this system, we know we're not going to get more than 15 volts. Even if this thing was going out, it would put out about 30, I think. I don't know what alternators put out for max. Okay, we got 14.26 volts at idle. I've got the negative, or the ground, going right here onto the engine, and the positive going right to the back side of the alternator here. So now let's, I'm gonna reach over here and I'm gonna rev the engine up. We'll see what happens on this. Okay, so these alternators, on an older car you have a voltage regulator. So an alternator puts out more than 14 volts. The voltage regulator is what brings it down to usable battery range. So my thoughts are this alternator has an internal voltage regulator. So the voltage regulator is probably bad on this alternator. Even though it's putting out more than 12 volts when you rev it up, your battery needs more than that to operate. So it's probably happening. Let me shut this engine off. What's probably happening is that voltage regulator is failing, and that is just the battery voltage that we're seeing at that point. So one way to test that would be to remove the negative cable off the battery, and we could start it, and if the engine starts to die out, that means that we're not getting enough voltage to run. So what would happen is I could drive this thing for a while, 50 miles, 100 miles, and it will run off of the battery voltage, but once the battery voltage gets too low, then the vehicle will not run because it's a fuel injected vehicle. If this was a carbureted vehicle, you could probably drive it until you shut it off. Maybe not. Anyway, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove that alternator because, excuse me, because the local auto parts stores can test them easily. They'll hook it up, test it, and let me know if it's bad. Well, there you go. That kind of also says what was happening once we revved it up. It went right to battery voltage because we're hooked up. The engine is shut off. We have battery voltage to right there. So that's what it was reverting to once you revved it. So if I was to drive this thing right now to Utah, I might make it 100 miles or so. Once the battery drained down enough that it wouldn't run the fuel injection system anymore, we'd be stuck on the side of the road, and then we would have to charge the battery. You could jump start it, it might run for a minute or two, but that would be all you would get. So pretty suspect here, this alternator. We will remove it, take a look at it. Maybe there's something obvious that we can fix before we take it in. First thing I'm going to do before I start working on this is I'm going to remove the positive cable over here. The next step will be to pop this off of here, which is just a little clip behind here. I don't know how well you can see it, I'm sorry. Right there. Just gotta kind of lift that tab up, pull that off. And this bolt comes off, it's a 10 millimeter. And then after that, I will show you what we're gonna do. First thing you need to do if you're gonna remove an accessory on an engine like this is to get the bolt belt tensioner loose. On this one, the belt tensioner is right here. This is a 16 millimeter, and I've got my 1/2 inch drive breaker bar. You just reach up here. See how the whole thing is spring loaded. So you pull that back, and one-handed, I'm gonna try to hold on to my breaker bar here. Oops, I'm sorry for all this. Hold on to my breaker bar and my camera, and then peel that belt off of there. Wow, I can't believe I did that. Now, there's 3 bolts holding this alternator on. There's one there, and one there. These 2 are 10 millimeter, and I don't know, that's a 12 or a 13. So we'll get those off, and then this alternator will just come right out. All the bolts are out, so let's see if it comes out of here. On this little pivot here. Oops, and down we go. Okay, let's bring her in the shop and take a look at it. I usually don't mess with these, I usually just take them in, but we might as well take a peek at it and see if we can notice anything odd. I've worked on a couple alternators in the past. This is not my forte, but then again, what is? I work on a lot of different things, and sometimes I even fix them. But just looking at this one, I can see I've got some soldered connections here that looks like they need to be unsoldered before you can even remove this back portion. Some of the other alternators I've worked on in the past, you've got a plate back here where you can get to the voltage regulator, or this whole back cover is a plastic cover that comes off and you have access to it. This one looks like it's going to be considerably more difficult, and messing around with it. The difference between the price of a voltage regulator and an alternator, it's like $40 for a voltage regulator and $80 for an alternator. So the savings isn't dramatic. So I think I'm just going to take this in, have the auto parts store test it as well, which should say the same thing that my test did, that it's charging at idle and then no charge after that, and then we'll replace it. This is how you know how easy of a job this is. I haven't even finished my coffee yet this morning. So alternator change, 1 coffee job. Okay, they didn't have the cheapest one in stock, which I was going to cheap out for my daughter here, my son-in-law, but I got the second cheapest one, which is lifetime warranty. If you're new to repairing auto parts, some of them have what's called a core charge. This one had a core charge of $11. So if you have the part off and you bring it in, they'll exchange it right there. Otherwise, you have to bring the part in. It's the same thing for batteries, sometimes water pumps, starters, things like that they can rebuild, but not always. Sometimes they don't have a core charge. But anyway, we got out of there for $100 bucks. Let's get back and install this thing. The words that a lot of mechanics hate to read in the manual is installation is reverse of removal. They just never point out any of the little tricks and stuff that you need to do, but here's one for y'all. If you're installing something like this, just get the fasteners all started. See how I didn't put that one all the way in? That one's not all the way in. Just get them kind of started, because everything is just a fraction off of, you know, what it could be. So if you put this one in and tighten it all the way, then you could maybe not get that one in, or maybe not get that one in. Actually, you know, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because both of these two, I put this pivot one in first, and I had to kind of push down a bit to get that one in, and then this one I had to pull back a little bit. So it's just something to remember. So I'm gonna get those tightened up. We'll get the belt on and plug it in, and we'll see where we're at. Belt's installed, plugged in, tightened up, installed the battery terminal. Let's bring it on inside here. Let's see what we got. Volts. Okay. Good to go. And that's a good thing, because I was about to drive this thing 2,000 miles and I don't know, wouldn't have made it. I mean, like I said, I could stop. I was going to be traveling to Utah with my son, and then beyond that would be on my own. But we plan on leaving at night because this truck doesn't have air conditioning, and I got to drive through Las Vegas. It's about 100 degrees, so driving at night with the lights on, this thing wouldn't have made it very far. And I almost said, maybe it'll make it. No reason for that when it was that easy to do. It wasn't terribly expensive. I mean, I don't like throwing $100 bills around, but in the grand scheme of things, for a car repair, $100 isn't too bad. And alternator on many vehicles is very easy. It can be done with hand tools. So if you think you got an alternator problem, take a look. If you have never done it before, you know, call up one of your friends who has fingers that look like that most of the time, and they'll give you a hand probably for a beer and a burrito or something. So awesome. If you're digging what I'm putting out, give me that thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and if you're not already a subscriber, please consider doing so. I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. Get out there and find your adventure. Adios.